Somewhere out there is a person seeking a very unique combination of angles, features, measurements, and capabilities. I am going to try and match this bike with that unique person. And for the rest of the people out there in gravel world, this might just be a lesson in a bunch of different unusual things that we might be seeing more or less of in the future of gravel bikes. This is the 2023 Giant Revolt X, but everything I talk about in this video is going to be equally applicable to other Revolt X's, both the 2024 and the carbon version, the 2024 or 2023 Revolt X Advanced Pro. Hey bike geeks, from weight to wheels, price to performance, we're here to take a close look at bicycles so you can make an educated decision when selecting your next bike. In today's video, we're having a close look at this Giant Revolt X. So the Revolt name has been in the Giant program for a number of years now. The Revolt X is basically a new product, and as I think, if I remember correctly, last year was the first year of the Revolt X. To give you an idea, whether it is a Revolt or an X, that means that we're talking about a gravel bike, a drop bar gravel bike in the Giant program. When talking to Giant about it, what they say is basically the Revolt is sort of a racing inspired gravel bike. The Revolt X is going to be an explorer's gravel bike. I will admit that I'm frustrated with both of the bikes because I like one-by drivetrains, and the idea of the suspension on a gravel bike, for me, a guy who even on a gravel ride is probably spending 60% of my time on asphalt, just the idea, even though I've tried to talk myself into this bike because I find it actually really appealing in some ways, the thought of road riding on a bike with extra squish to me is just not appealing. So I'm going to start this thing right off the bat and say a Revolt X may very well be an excellent consideration for you if your gravel rides are actually a lot of gravel and single track or actual exploring. If your gravel rides are much more about riding a lot of pavement, a bit of gravel, and that gravel doesn't tend to be very bumpy, maybe not the Gravel X as a bike for you. But in this video, we're going to be taking a look and talking about the Revolt X, the different models of Revolt X, the fact that there are alloy versions like this one, carbon versions, and also just where some of those differences are between a Revolt and a Revolt X. While we're talking about this being a 2023, if you're considering a 2024, don't be turned off by this information because for the most part, the spec is remaining the same with the exception of this particular Revolt X has a Sram Rival drivetrain on it, and I believe the new 2024 version of this bike will probably have a wider range of gears with the Apex group set on there. But beyond that, there are actually a number of pretty interesting things about this bike. So if you are an adventure gravel rider, you really like getting off the beaten path on your drop bar bike, I think you should probably stick around and learn a little bit more about the Revolt X and see if this is an appropriate bike for you to add to your wish list. Okay, we're going to get into more specs, talking about weight, talking about details, talking about angles, measurements, and all that sort of stuff then coming up next. So I'm really struggling with how to put this video together. Because this thing is just unusual and there are a lot of fine details that I need to show off on this. To start with, this is the alloy version of the Revolt X. I go looking up the Revolt X on the USA Giant website, and it turns out that they don't even think that the consumer base in the States wants to have an alloy version of this bike because it doesn't seem to appear. But if you're in the States, I would say still pay attention because I'm going to show you a bunch of things that are common between this alloy version of the Revolt X and your carbon or advanced versions that you have down there. So as I said before, this is an explorer gravel bike. This is not a racy gravel bike. So that means that this is a little bit more about big tires, being able to handle really rough terrain as opposed to being flat out fast. The funny thing is, I would, for a lot of the huge events that I see sort of advertised, I would probably think that this would be the bike that I would consider the race bike, and the other one just less hardcore. But that's where gravel is still kind of a growing and emerging market with different ideas coming out. I'm sure seeing things like a suspension fork on here, many people who pay attention to people like Dylan Johnson or others who have taken the idea of a cross-country mountain bike and putting drop bars on it to work for hardcore gravel events would look at this and go, yes, I see what you mean about this is more the gravel race bike. Anyways, details about this bike. There are so many. Being a Giant, this is coming with tubeless setup, tubeless tires on here. The stock tire size is 700 by 45C, and that is the max tire size when using this bike with the rear axle flip chip in the short position. So that is one of the first interesting features on here. There are 10 millimeters of chainstay length adjustment that you can provide by flipping that flip chip back and forth. It's a 142 by 12 through axle rear end, and then that flip chip, of course, is switching things around. That changes your chainstay length from 425 to 435. In the 435 flip chip measurement, you are also going to then be able to get all the way up to a 50C tire. I went looking for information about these rims. I don't know what the internal width is, but I'm going to say they look wide just looking at them compared to this 45C tire. So I think as far as riding in rough terrain, you're going to be able to set these things up soft enough that you're going to get some really nice compliance and traction out of the whole thing. I'm going to touch on the drivetrain only briefly, because if you're watching to get information about the Revolt X in general or a 2024 version, it will change. But on this particular 2023, it's a Sram Rival with an 1142, which is the same gear range as a 11-speed Shimano GRX would have had in 2023. We have a nice looking set of cranks on here with a narrow wide chainring and the road version of a direct mount chainring on there. We have, kind of as an unusual thing, we have, for Giant at least, on a performance level bike, that's a threaded bottom bracket in there with external bearings, so not a press fit. So I think that that is actually a nice feature for a gravel bike, with gravel riding maybe being the thing that is going to pack the most sludge into anywhere possible that you could possibly get. So having a bottom bracket that you can quickly spin out to service or to clean things out is obviously going to be a nice touch. The general shape of the frame, part of the reason that I really like this, I think it's just like a really nice, simple looking frame. They've got these thinned out alloy seat stays on here, so they're obviously working like so many brands are to give you a little bit of flex just in that in the seat stay. And when I say flex, we're not talking about this thing having suspension from the frame. We're just talking about some fine vibration that actually isn't going straight up the length of a tube, that it's sort of hitting the tube on a little bit more of a tangential angle. How's about that? We're going to start sounding like a bunch of nerds here. So 1142 on the back, 11 speeds, tubeless tires, actually set up tubeless at the shop, which is really nice. These tires are a Giant in-house tire. Look really nice. They kind of go with the theme of actually exploring, not glorified pavement bike. We have some features as far as these little plugs here, and that is where Giant gives you tiny little L brackets basically if you're going to be mounting something on there like a fender. So you get that, and you get some little threaded inserts down there. We see where the dropper post cable is coming from the internal down tube routing and then heading back up inside the seat tube. An interesting thing on here is the way that the seat clamp is done. We don't just have a collar around a round tube here. This is sort of, because Giant does a thing called D-fuse seat posts, which are seat posts that are D-shaped to give some sort of flex backwards. They have an odd-shaped profile in the top of the seat tube here, even though down lower we're talking about basically a round to the touch down here. Anyways, that's a 4mm Allen key. If you ever have one of these and need to loosen it off, loosen that. You have to tap the top of your Allen key to free some wedges from each other, and then you'll be able to move that. This brings up another one of the really interesting things on this bike. This is a Post-Modern, which is an actual brand and model of seat post, and a lot of people don't seem to know about this. It is both a dropper and a suspension post all in one. So everything above the size, or from size small and up in this bike, is going to get 100mm of drop, but there's also 30mm of squish in there as well. So when you're sitting on this thing, it actually gives a pretty nice feel to it. It's not like the cheap comfort bike sort of sitting on a pogo stick feel. It actually feels controlled, and for an average weight rider, I think it is going to give you some extra comfort. Speaking of comfort, these Giant Approach saddles are actually, they're quite sleek. They kind of have that modern stubby-nosed appearance to them, maybe not as stubby as some of them, but the padding is pretty fair. We have a good amount of relief for not crushing your plumbing bits. We have 3 different positions for your bottles as far as being down tube, seat tube. I guess this isn't really a bottle position, that's more of a feed bag position, but you can at least then get 2 good sized water bottles. This is a size medium that we're looking at here, and I don't think I mentioned it yet, but this bike weighs 24 pounds. So not ultra light, but considering the fact that it's got a whole bunch of interesting things going on with it, a reasonable weight, I would say. Moving forward to other interesting things on this bike, of course, one of the things that's going to bring up a lot of discussion is the fact that this has the RockShox Rudy Explorer 40mm travel gravel fork. So it is designed for comfort, not like performance as we would typically see on a mountain bike fork. But once again, if you're sort of an average weight, that seems to give a pretty nice feel. Doesn't feel too noodly as far as if you're using your brakes, you don't feel like the front end is getting any extra flex or anything. Getting into what else can we look at to kind of show off more interesting stuff. The handlebars on here. So this is a case of, you would think for a big explorer bike like this is when we're seeing on a lot of other exploring bikes, and by exploring I'm talking about those big tired bikes like Salsa Cutthroats, something like that. You often see massive handlebars with massive amounts of flare. We don't see that really here. On these particular handlebars, we're talking, I think it was like 16 degrees of flare. It doesn't look very flared, but what they do have in turn is these are D-fuse handlebars. They have a really, really nice back sweep to the flats on top, and then a very flattened out profile. So if you're really smashing through some rough stuff, the fact that you can put your palms on here, the same reason I used to love some of the FSA SLK road drop handlebars that would have been called wing handlebars then. This is a really nice thing as far as for comfort goes. Some people will talk about aerodynamics. Who cares about that? We're on a gravel bike, but the comfort of this kind of flattened out surface is really, really nice. Another thing that is of interest is the way the dropper post is activated. So we have this secondary little thing here. So we don't get to use the double tap, and that is because on this Post-Modern that we're talking about, its dead end is going to be down inside the seat tube here somewhere, the dead end of the cable. And so that means that the live end of the cable, the part that we actually feed through, is up here. So that is why we can't use the actual double tap activator of the dropper post, which would rely on the dead end up here, and then having the clamp at the bottom of the dropper seat post. So another interesting thing there. More interesting things to talk about. I would say, as we're seeing in the world of gravel bikes, we're seeing geometries evolving fairly quickly. And what we're often seeing when we're talking about bikes that get into larger tire sizes or talking about suspension is we'll often see tall stack heights. And I'm thinking about, there was something that was just released by Kona that had a pretty tall stack height on it. And also pretty mountain bike inspired geometries. This bike doesn't have that. So I'm thinking somewhere out there are going to be people who have maybe an XC race background or a true road racing background, and they truly feel more comfortable on a steeper angled, head angled at least, bike, and they want their weight on their hands probably as part of that whole thing. And so they're going to really like this sort of feel. So we're still talking about reaches that get a little bit longer. So this basically this horizontal distance in here is longer, which would kind of be on trend, and the reason that we're seeing shorter stems at least than what we would see on a road bike, but a short head tube angle or short head tube length there. And then to give you an idea of the kind of numbers we're talking about here, head tube angles on this bike between the sort of smallest end and the largest end of the range are between 71 and 72 degrees. And that compares to seeing things in like the 69 to 71 range on a lot of newer things coming out. Seat tube angles maybe just a little bit on the slacker side then too, ranging from 73.5 on the smallest size bike up to 73 on the largest size bikes. So a little bit more for you to consider and to keep in mind if you're trying to figure out if this is going to be a great bike for you. So this particular bike, the 2023 Revolt X1, the aluminum version, $35.99 was the regular price. That was a little bit of an inflated COVID price, I would say. We have these on sale in the store for $26.95. We are actually selling them or have them advertised for cheaper than what Giant kind of condones. But that is largely because the 2024 version of this bike, which then has that Sram Eagle 1x12 drivetrain with a 1050 tooth range and otherwise basically the same spec, that is now $32.99. So if you're shopping around for this and if you don't have access to our discounted price, that 2024 does look like a good deal if you decide that the combination of all the unusual things on this bike is up your alley. As I was showing those handlebars and talking about widths, I just wanted to mention they are from size small. They start at a 440 millimeter width. By the time you're at medium and medium large, 460, and larges have 480 millimeter width. But then warning you that we don't have massive flare. So just be prepared for the fact that this is going to keep you, even when you're in the drops, your hands aren't going to be out in the ditches sort of thing. You're still going to be a little bit more compressed, which once again to me makes this seem like an actual hardcore gravel race gravel bike. If anybody from Giant ever watches one of these videos, which I doubt they would make it this far because they're probably pretty busy, please just make this bike with even more tire capacity, with that 1x drivetrain, a standard dropper post, and a suspension corrected carbon fork. I find this bike to be really appealing just looks wise. I think everything about the geometry would probably feel really nice and still be confident enough when it got hairy. But I like my my drop bar bikes to feel pretty rigid, and my standard gravel ride still has a lot of pavement, but I would love to be on sort of a really aggressive, big tired gravel bike, and I would love to try something like this. So if you're listening at Giant, do something like that. But from my begging of our local rep about this, he said, if you want rigid, get a Revolt. If you want suspension, get the Revolt X. And if you want 2x, there's probably something wrong with you because 2x sucks. He didn't say that. I say that. I am the hater of 2x drivetrains. After many, many years of adjusting and living with front derailleurs, one of the happiest days of my life was when this was invented and perfected. So this has been the Revolt X. It's a bit of a different video. Hopefully, if you're a gravel nerd, you are finding this sort of information useful, and hopefully pointing out some things that may not be that obvious from the way Giant has promoted this bike, talked about this bike, talked about the features. And get out there, ride your bike.